There we go. Okay. Well, hello, everyone. So thanks for all joining. Today's session is going to be I don't know, which number are we on, JB, in your deep dive series for Data Cloud for your group?
Eighth.
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 All right. I should know that, but we're in the eighth session. Today, we're going to talk about Data Cloud and MCP. And I put the longest title in the world. It feels like a symbiotic relationship, complementing and enhancing each other's features.
But I
Really, at
like
the end
the
of the day,
title. Yeah, I like the
yeah,
title, Jacob. Sorry to interrupt. I was about to say that.
no, yeah,
Meaningful.
that was a that was a scratch whiteboard session. Like, how do I want to name this other than just like how do these things work? Uh, so at the end of the day, what we're going to talk about today is basically how these two can complement each other or work, outside of each other. What does that look like? Well, we're going to dive into who the heck you're talking to at the moment, or is talking to you all. So Jacob Hayes, it's nice to meet you all. I work at a company called Emphasis Silverline, and I'm the data cloud and AI go-to-market lead. My prior experience has been a personalization practice lead, as well as a solution architect at Salesforce, handling cross-cloud implementations in large organization, basically transformational engagements. So it's been a good ride for 10 plus years so far in this ecosystem. Okay, but you guys don't want to know about me too much. It's more of like, what are we going to talk about today? So at high level, we're going to kind of try to run through these main agenda items, and I'll try my best not to talk too quickly. So for the agenda today, we're going to try to go down what is the personalization to data cloud connector, give a little bit of demystifying what it is, talk about best practices on what the connector does, how it handles events from anonymous users, and then go into a tips and tricks section. The one thing that we're not going to do today is any hands-on keys work or a demo. Sorry, I'm going to keep this conceptual at a very high level. And then there's a lot of other cool things that are going on, especially if you're in the partner community with Chris Long and team and the partner product success team. And they have a recent lab that they just completed where you can actually do the hands-on work for this. So I didn't want to be duplicative. And speaking of Chris, so a lot of the stuff that you're going to see today is thanks to my friend Chris Long. So Chris is one of the senior managers from Partner Product Success. He is fantastic. If you don't follow him on LinkedIn already, follow him, do a shout out. He does a lot of amazing work along with Vlad, Arvind, Matt Wash, and everyone from that Partner Success or Partner Product Success team. They just changed their name. I need to remember it. So shout out, Chris, if you're going to watch this on YouTube. Good job. Thank you. Okay, so let's dive into it. What is this connector? At a high level, hopefully, by the way, hopefully everyone understands what Data Cloud is and Marketing Cloud Personalization is, because I'm not going to do an overview of what the two products are. Maybe I should have, but we'll run in. We're just going to dive headfirst into this topic today. So Data Cloud on this left-hand side, what is Data Cloud? From our perspective of looking at Data Cloud versus MCP or looking at them together, Data Cloud enriches profiles from user profile data and events from personalization, and there's a connector. And that connection is configured to Data Cloud. And all that basically is saying is the rich information that you're capturing from Marketing Cloud personalization, from a web, from a mobile app, from multiple channels, can be shared directly into Data Cloud to further augment or provide more detail into a unified customer profile that Data Cloud is creating. Now, on the right-hand side, personalization. Personalization is really omni-channel, but it's focused on capturing that first-party data of an individual. Most of the time, we see it in a web, mobile environment. So as an individual goes to an unauthenticated website, a JavaScript beacon collects information about that individual after they accept cookie consent. We then track what they're doing on the site. We go further than just Google Analytics tracking and page scroll depth, etc. But what we're really doing within personalization is saying, what is that affinity that someone is doing, or that raising that digital red hand, so that red hand up to say basically, hey, how am I interacting with your website properties and potentially doing a CTA? Now, if you want more information on MCP, shameful plug. JB has also done a fantastic series for MCP, and we can go into a lot more detail. Okay, but what does the connector look like from an event flow perspective? So we'll take this diagram and we'll start from the top and we'll work our way down. Then once we hit data cloud, we'll come back into the segment data. So follow along with me. So personalization, like we talked about, it captures data from our web SDK, from a website, the mobile SDK from a mobile site itself, or we can event API data in and even bring in ETL data into personalization. Come back to this red piece in a few seconds. So once we get data into personalization, we do things in a couple different ways. So we send that event data via CSV hourly through the connector to Data Cloud. And I'll show what that data looks like. So basically anything you're collecting from an event stream perspective or from segments or alongside a unified profile within Marketing Cloud Personalization, we send that down into Data Cloud to, like we talked about before, further give more context and information to that unified individual. Data Cloud works in the same way that you guys have potentially seen or talked about Data Cloud already. As you're unifying individuals or creating amazing calculated insights on the data that you're collecting within Data Cloud, we want to be able to share that back down to personalization. The main reason is personalization is a real-time interaction management platform. What does that mean? It means we want to be able to action off this information to change the look and feel of the site, of a mobile app, of a portal, etc. And by utilizing the Data Cloud data that you have alongside the personalization data, gives you more rich, robust segments. So that's why you see the segment data CSV. The segment data CSV comes back, as you see in the hours, between a 12 to 24 hour segment. It populates into the platform. We then can use that within personalization. Now, I said I'd come back to the red on the right. So there's one thing, because we talked about ETLing. So extract, transfer, and load processes that personalization can accept. With the connector right now, we technically cannot. It's unsupported right now, and there is no roadmap that I know of, forward-looking statement, to potentially have this, which means you can't do an external ETL into personalization that can flow into Data Cloud in that functionality. Wish we could, but it's not supported at this moment. All right. So let's talk about as data is flowing. We'll show you from two different views what this data looks like and how it's going to show up in each platform. We're in personalization right now on the screen. So personalization on the event stream, we're going to be capturing those interactions that someone is doing with the website. For this example, they're viewing the homepage. And when they view that homepage, there's this JSON that comes in, and it's the event detail on the right-hand side. It gives us different understandings of the page type that they're on, potential locales, content zones that they've touched, the profile ID, which is personalization's identifier for this individual, as well as the URL. On the Data Cloud side, it comes in a little similar. And the positive view of once data is flowing in and you've done your connection into Data Cloud from personalization and you want to view it or explore it within Data Explorer, you can make this view as you edit columns look exactly or as close as possible to the image or how you would view the data in personalization. But in Data Cloud, you can see it very similar. We're bringing in the event time data, we're bringing in the profile ID. Profile ID again, it's the same identifier we showed in the last screen. It also gives us our action, our email address, our additional identifiers, and source URLs. Now let's look at this a different way. So before now we were showing data and data flowing into personalization or into Data Cloud itself. What about segments? So we can create segments in Data Cloud. So in this specific segment, thanks to Chris, he created a just to me segment, which is basically just looking at himself. And one of the examples here is, all right, great. I've created this segment within Data Cloud, but what do I want to do with it? Well, I want to push it down into personalization. And so within personalization, if you're familiar with the platform, we have user segments. And as you come into user segments, you're able to view who and what should I be targeting as we create these segments. When it comes in to personalization, you see this little M icon right here. All that's showing in our personalization technology, it's saying this is a manual segment. But manual segments are only done in two ways. It's a Data Cloud connector sending a segment down, or we can manually CSV segments in to the platform, but most people don't do that. So this is our way of differentiating and understanding which segments come through from Data Cloud. I have a couple of best practice tips near the end on nomenclature, but we're just covering the basics right now. Okay. So now we understand kind of the core crux of what they do. Let's talk about best practices or when to use what. So if you're familiar with Data Cloud, and hopefully you all are, in the setup menu, there's different ways to configure ingestion sources. And those ingestion sources or the connections themselves into the website mobile apps, Interaction Studio, Ingestion API, etc. This is where you'll start your configuration of personalization. I took this screen grab to show you that a lot of times in your instances or your client's instances of Data Cloud, you're going to see the name Interaction Studio. That means personalization or Marketing Cloud personalization. You'll also see something soon. If you listen to the connections keynotes, you'll probably start seeing this Einstein personalization connector as well soon. We don't want to be confused with every single one, but we do need to understand what each one does. And so we talked a little bit about why we would use a website mobile app and Interaction Studio. We're about to go a little bit deeper into why from there, but just giving you guys a heads up. I wish they would update the naming convention structure, but Salesforce loves the name change. All right, so which one? In this specific example on the screen, we're basically going to talk about if if a client or a customer already has personalization, or sorry, not this one. I jumped ahead. In this one, we're basically saying which one from a versus perspective. You're also, if you're having catchy eye or you're reading it ahead of me talking, you're going to see, Jacob, you wrote the same thing in both boxes. And I'm going to tell you, yes, I did. Way to be introduced into kind of the confusion between the website and apps connector and the personalization connector itself. So let's talk about it, and let's talk about the two areas, or the one area that's really the differentiator. So this first bullet says we're either collecting from a website or mobile app. Personalization is collecting from all channels. And that key differentiator is the reason between why you would choose each one. If you have a company or a customer that you're working with, they have one website, and that one website collects very simplistic information. You're probably going to, depending on your use case, and you have to do your pros and cons, you'll probably use the website and apps connector versus fully implementing Marketing Cloud personalization itself. Now, let's do the vice versa. If you're working with a company that has multiple domains, maybe ones through from a global footprint perspective, and additionally subdomains along with mobile apps and different website portals, you're going to probably want to think about personalization being the main driver of getting that data into Data Cloud itself. And so this is where you would look at this right-hand side of the screen. And then you have to make that call of which one would be the most realistic to use. Now, the other key differentiator that I didn't write on the slide is if you do the website and apps connector, that's fantastic to pull data into Data Cloud. But you do need to think about, when am I displaying this to the end state customer, prospect, member, etc.? If you just do the website and apps connector, you don't have that ability. Right now, to change a banner on the website, to change the digital footprint or something that's occurring. That's where personalization comes in. And with the future release of Einstein personalization, you're going to start to see a blending of these two even more. And we'll probably do our own session on that, JB, as it gets closer to the end of the year.
Sure, Jacob. That sounds like a plan.
Yep, good. Okay, so then when do we use the connector? I jumped ahead when I was talking earlier. Let's try to keep it simple. So if a customer already has personalization on the website or they have the platform already purchased, don't, as I love a good Ghostbusters theme, don't cross the streams. And what I mean by that is just don't have both of them running at the same time. You can't have the scripts running at the same time, by the way. The SDK is shared between Data Cloud and MCP. If you do try to have both methods loading onto a page, you're going to have each beacon script basically conflicting with one another. And those conflicts are probably going to cause issues not only with data collection, which is going to be a cost perspective, but also cookie tracking, which is, I mean, from a GDPR and CCPA perspective, you don't want to mess with that. So just to exacerbate this point even more, if they already have personalization, run with the platform. If they don't already have personalization, run through that kind of process flow that we were talking about a little bit before of saying, well, do they have multiple sites? And those multiple sites in multiple languages? Do we want to be able to show content back from our data? If you run through the process, you'll then be able to determine which solution is best for you or best for your customer. All right, we're doing well on time. So best practices, let's talk about events from anonymous data perspective. So before I go into this little diagram, just so everybody knows, Data Cloud can accept data from anonymous visitors on a website, and they can accept that both from the personalization side or from the web and mobile apps connector itself. Now, you have to be very careful with your configuration on anonymous events, and here's why. So on the flow, you're seeing that from left to right, most of the time, this is our configuration order when it comes to Data Cloud and MCP together. So most of the time, we're creating that connection for MCP to Data Cloud. We then have a critical step on deciding anonymous events. Come back to this in a second. We then create data streams, activation targets, segments, and activations overall. That's the flow. But the reason why this is right in this step and it's critical is you don't want to do this before you start collecting your data streams. You also want to make sure that you really understand the reasoning behind this. The reason behind why we're talking about known versus anonymous within Data Cloud is by default, the Data Cloud connector for MCP only sends events for known users from Marketing Cloud Personalization. That's weird when you think about it. Technically, it's also possible for us to send anonymous users. There's a setting within MCP that you click. But there's a couple of considerations that we have to walk through at a high level. Consideration number one. If you enable anonymous events, you're going to drastically increase the number of events that are coming into Data Cloud. And if we take that logical thought process a step further, more events means more data, which means more credit consumption. Because Data Cloud is a consumption-based platform, and as a consumption-based pricing model, you need to be careful here. So if you're going to send in, let's just do fake numbers at the moment. If you're sending in only known information, and that known information is potentially from, I don't know, a couple million individuals, you can already see like a couple of million individuals by events of what they're doing on the site can be a lot of data. Now that same potential person could have 6 million users from a traffic perspective on their site monthly. And if we take the difference between the 2 to the 6, you're potentially going to have a lot more data that you might not even be able to action off of within Data Cloud from an anonymous perspective. So keep that in mind. Consideration number 2, I kind of already baked it in. All of that increases costs. And number 3, which is a tough one, anonymous events cannot be reconciled to known users out of the box within Data Cloud. Personalization has native functionality that allows us to do its own identity resolution via simplistic deterministic factors. The Data Cloud won't be able to make that connection point. Now, you can still do this. This is why I put the out of the box thing in brackets there. You can technically still do this from a custom route, but the baseline setup of the connector with MCP will not do that for you. So you do have to figure out, how am I going to stitch that anonymous person to known when personalization makes them known? And that reconciliation can be a bit difficult. Okay, so that events from anonymous users setup screen gave you an image to it. Technically, that's all you have to click is to sync anonymous users to Salesforce CDP. And yes, Salesforce still hasn't updated the nomenclature there. So make sure that you understand that CDP is Data Cloud. Now, it's really simple. You just click this button, but make sure of all the considerations on the left hand or the last screen itself. All right. So let's continue down the tips and tricks route, and let's talk about understanding the rules for connecting. So a lot of information on the slide. Let's unpack it a bit. So let's look at the actual right-hand side first. So if we look at personalization and environment and Data Cloud as an environment, we can see a couple of different areas of what and how we connect. So from this first example, the simplest, one data cloud org or one instance of data cloud can be connected to one MCP account. But if you look at the next segment, we cannot have two data cloud orgs connected to one MCP account. And vice versa, we can't have two data cloud orgs connected to two different marketing cloud personalization data sets, which if you don't know what a marketing cloud personalization data set, it works very similar to business units within the marketing cloud world. It's just a delineation and a walled version of data within MCP itself. So each data set could be something as similar by regions or by production versus a development site, etc. So a couple of key things on the left-hand side, I think I've already noted. One of them is like each data set cannot be connected to a single org, and then multi-marketing cloud personalization accounts cannot have connections from multiple orgs. Now, number 6 as well on this list, when you see the red arrow, that's also not supported, where a single MCP dataset cannot be connected to more data cloud orgs as well. So a lot of information on the slide, but really the big crux of what you should take away from it is there's a single relationship between data cloud and MCP. And if you need to have multiple MCP instances connected to data cloud, you're gonna have to really think through the architectural model and how you would want to connect possibly those multiple data cloud instances to multiple MCP instances, which could, change up your implementation style. Okay, let's know the difference in events now and tips and tricks. So connector streams. Let's talk about connectors at a high level. So event data or engagement data. So Data Cloud automatically creates these 6 data streams on the left-hand side of the presentation as soon as you configure the actual connector itself. And those are all out of the box, and they're standard engagement types. And you can see it's catalog events, cart events, base events, order events, etc. Now, you do have to be careful and understanding what these events are doing. And the reason why I say that is not every implementation is going to be a retail or e-commerce site. And you can see a lot of the out-of-the-box connectors are focused towards that understanding. We work from an Emphasis Silverline perspective, we work with a lot of different B2B companies. And so a lot of these, well, not a lot of these, most of these from a cart perspective are just not going to happen. As we work with a B2B SaaS company, they're not going to have major purchases on the website. So we have to better understand how we're going to do these base events and potentially custom events as well. Now, the one thing on this screen, if you know, what I didn't highlight was users. Let's talk about that one. So users is its own different stream itself. And so it does, again, the Data Cloud connector does automatically create this for user profile data. And that user profile data will populate in from a known audience base from MCP into Data Cloud. Now, to help you out a little bit more with a visual, what do we look at we've talked about our Data Cloud events on the right-hand side over here. Those are our pieces. But personalization itself has these main events. We call them custom events, which is just custom items on a website that we configure to capture data on. Anything that's a non-product view page, page view, that can be blog post content, resource-based content onto the site, but that's not focused to a product that a company is selling or a service that company is selling. There's the purchases of products overall. There's add to cart, remove to cart, and view catalog objects. View catalog objects can be anything within your catalog that you design. So you can see that there's a one-to-many and sometimes a one-to-one relationship of how personalization data model is correlating to the Data Cloud event model itself. 2 things to note. The non-product views and the custom events will all flow into base events, which could be fine, but you will need to determine and be very consistent on your nomenclature and naming convention structure of what those base events are. Now, before I even talk about users on the screen, because I have nothing flowing to it, let's note the orange box. As of right now, campaign data and campaign event data does not flow into Data Cloud. And per my last conversation with the product team, it's technically not on the roadmap anymore as well. Big sad face from my side. So you do have to be careful with this because technically, if I was looking at this from a consultant and looking at from a third party perspective with no bias, that's tough because a lot of the information, the campaigns and what people are viewing, the impressions, the dismissals of what we're doing on, again, the website app, or so the website, the mobile app, or the portal, we want to be able to inform Data Cloud. You will have to go through a different method. So there's a couple of different ways, and if you go back to the personalization series, I think someone has talked about. Technically, when we build out templates within the personalization platform, we can call out that data and send it directly to Google Analytics. Google Analytics can capture it, or we can do another event from an API perspective to pass it to a different system. So you're going to have to note this, but I also feel like I could do another session just on campaign information. So maybe we hold off on that one any further. Okay, there's also the special event type of users. It lives and breathes on its own. It's a weird one. So let's talk about it a little bit more. So I'm actually going to, because I covered a lot of these items on the left-hand side. I'll come back to that in a second. Let's start the right-hand side, just because I'm trying to keep you all on your toes, whoever's listening. So users. So let's start talking about this conceptually at a very high level. As we've written it, Data Cloud's event driven. So what does that mean? It means data that's coming into Data Cloud from any source, not just personalization or others. It comes in via an event format in that ingestion. And as we look at users interacting with different channels, personalization collects data and puts it in a real-time cache, but that real-time cache is not just an event format. And that real-time cache is going to send the latest information to Data Cloud. But regardless of whether there is a specific attribute included in the event payload or any other items, all the custom user attributes for a profile are going to be sent in this cached manner. And there's a source at the bottom of the screen if you want to read it, if I don't do a good enough explanation here. So you have to be very careful of what you're going to send and how you're going to send it, and how you're going to configure that ingestion method within Data Cloud. Meaning, if it's an event format, an event-driven format for ingestion, we want to make sure that we're calling out the right timings and the right timestamps for items. So hopefully that's as clear as mud on users. Let's talk about catalogs. So everything on the left-hand side, that's sent immediately from MCP to Data Cloud, but it's not processed immediately. It does take up to an hour. We've seen these often processed a lot quicker, but it does take some time. And I know that forward-looking statement can't take the Salesforce out of Jacob. There is some real-time components coming down the roadmap in the next couple of releases of Data Cloud and MCP getting really close to real time. And when I say like really close to real time, personalization is at the was it less than 20 milliseconds or less than that to get information in the platform. Data Cloud's going to start getting to that level, hopefully within the next couple of releases. Okay, I talked about timestamps. Shocking, I was leading a little bit into my next slide. So one of the biggest things here is you want to be able to choose the right timestamp. So the event time versus event date. Now you want to choose event time instead of event date so that you know the actual date and time that a record's coming in from personalization into Data Cloud. If you choose the other, you'll see from that cache perspective we talked about on the last screen, everything from an event date will all come in at the same timestamp from a hours perspective to an actual day. That's tough. So make sure to choose the right one so that the batch processing dates aren't going to be the thing that drives the majority of your information. Hopefully everyone's still following. Take a pause for a second. Anyone have any questions before we go on? I haven't seen anything pop through. Okay. Feel free to ask questions as they come up.
I don't see any questions as of now, Jacob. Maybe towards the end of the session.
Sounds like a plan. Thanks, JB. So let's talk about segment activation. Okay. So when we use the connector to activate, we look at this in 3 steps. Step 1 is creating that activation target. That's why we showed that timeline. earlier in the presentation. So in Data Cloud, an activation target for each personalization data set are automatically created. And you then include them as part of your configuration process or connection process itself. Then step two, you're creating that segment, which is the same way that you create any segment for activation in Data Cloud. If you're creating a segment for lookalike audiences that are going to flow into Meta, or if you're creating a segment that's going to then populate into a data extension within Marketing Cloud, same process. Then you're going to choose an activation, step three. So that activation target that you configured in step one is where you'll actually then point the data or the segment that you've created in Data Cloud to then flow into personalization to be used as a segment. Again, what does that look like from a high level perspective? In activation targets within Data Cloud, you can see not only are we doing a couple of different examples here from Chris's side, we also show you what platform it's being sent into, the refresh mode, etc. Now, they're automatically added as activation targets when you include them. So I just want to double down on that statement that I wrote here. So if you do the connection correctly, these should populate. If they don't, that means your setup is wrong. You're going to have to do our favorite IT term of probably turn it off and turn it back on. So basically disengage and then re-engage the connection source. Now you saw when I was showing before, there's different ways to basically standard or rapid publish activations from Data Cloud. You're only going to have the ability to do standard publish as of right now to MC personalization. So the rapid publish is not supported as of today, as I mentioned. I do not know if it's on roadmap. So that is something we could look up if needed. So you'll have the standard publish. The standard publish will then get you to the next step, which is you're going to prioritization your email. Sorry, you're going to prioritize. It's a better way of saying that, Jacob. Your email field for activation. You do need to make sure that you set your email address source priority to align with Marketing Cloud personalization. So as you create identity types within personalization, which is the way that personalization can then understand that's an identity type as an email versus a customer identifier versus a CRM 18-digit contact ID or a lead ID, you have to follow the similar structure for the activation to send the information and for it to be reconciled correctly within personalization. From there, you're going to activate the segment. So once you activate that segment from Data Cloud, it's going to populate through into the feeds system within MCP. So let's take a step back. The feed system within MCP is the ETL processing that we talked about in the diagram way in the beginning of the presentation. So anything from an ETL perspective or files that are going to be batch loaded come into the feeds personalization piece. We had talked about before, all segments sent from Data Cloud to MCP are processed as manual segments. And so the manual segments will be noted, and you can find the processing history under Salesforce CDP activation. Once you click on Salesforce CDP activation, you'll see the similar pieces on the screen. When did the job complete? How long did it take the job to complete? And you can review the data that is sent over. Again, that manual segment is then added into MCP. And that MCP segment comes through. It looks exactly like we talked about before. And again, the orange M badge is easy for identification. But here's another best practice tip to add on top of it. A lot of times when we're working in these two platforms and we send these over, it's great that they have the M badge. What would be much better is considering adding a descriptor to the segment name that allows us to understand it's either coming from Data Cloud along with what it's doing. So having a descriptor itself within the naming convention. So instead of it saying just me here, you could say just me dash Data Cloud or etc., something like that. It's probably a terrible example, but I think you guys will understand it. That allows us to know what's Data Cloud focused information and what's MCP focused information. And the reason why is based on latency and timing of data. If we want to do something extremely real time within MCP, like we gather information within the 20 milliseconds or 30 milliseconds, they enter into a segment and we want to activate and change a banner and do a pop-up or something on the website, might not want to use the Data Cloud segment for that. given the hour base of the 12 hours to 24 hours of data being updated. But maybe we want to use some of the segment information and user information that's coming from Data Cloud to fill into a segment that's not going to be real time. So maybe something that we do on a weekly basis or something like that. And then the platform, that's also perfectly fine. All right, a little bit of secrets into segment activation. Don't know why I said it like that, but that'll be fun for the recording. So, so one piece here. So no email address. Look on the left-hand side. So if a user in your activation segment does not have an email address, and you put them into that segment and send them over to MCP, they'll still be sent. And that's gonna be tough because you're depending on your use case, you may not be able to activate on that user or even reconcile who that person is. So be very careful on sending anything down that doesn't have an identity type aligned in MCP. Now, typically the next question I get from people is, what about different email addresses, Jacob? From a B2B world or even in the B2C world, you might have householding, you might have individuals who are sharing email addresses. How do we handle that? Well, again, we're looking at the priority of the email source as the activation channel, or as into the activation itself. This is what you configure in Data Cloud. So your source priority rules to help with identity resolution and match and reconciliation within Data Cloud is critical in this process as well. Now, the reason why I say it's critical is the second half of that paragraph on the right-hand side. So if that information is sent to MCP for a user that does not already exist, a new user profile will be created for them, which means you'll have multiple instances of someone with an MCP, which in MCP world, we're charged for those folks. So we're charged for known individuals into the platform into a profile model. That's not a consumption-based model, but it's a profile model. So again, in order to not bloat or expand your customer or your clients, consumption from a Data Cloud perspective and costs from an MCP perspective, you have to take the right approaches here. All right. I'm actually doing really good on time. Okay, so let's see, there's one question before I go. So JB, looks like there's one question in the chat. I'm going to handle that right after the additional resources section, if that's okay for everybody. So, because we're only a couple slides away from the end. Okay, so helpful resources. So based off all the information we've shared today that you've seen from others, there's a lot of interesting resources that are, out there within the industry on the Data Cloud knowledge base side, which is the left-hand side. So giving you access to glossary terms, help in training developer, the connector, and the bundle mappings themselves. So you have access to all of that. There's Data Cloud series themselves on decoded and illustrated series that I think are really good as you're starting to better understand Data Cloud platform. And then there's additional resources on the bottom as well, on the bottom right, on the consultant trail mix, getting started, Trailhead Academy, and Data Cloud reference guides. And shockingly, you guys are on this series. I think everything that's being said, which has been said so far, as well as the sessions coming up, this is a fantastic resource for you all as well. All right, now let's go into Q&A. So there was a question in the chat that basically said, can we send segment, or let me read it first before I repeat it back. Okay, this question is related to segmenting based off of account segments. So Data Cloud does a good job of understanding from a B2B perspective, householding models and account models themselves. So in this specific example of the question in the chat, they're saying, hey, can we send over a segment based off the unified account? So high level, yes, you could. Personalization still has something within the platform that's called account profiles. And it's from the B2B detect SKU within the platform. And all that basically does is it allows you to look at accounts and how the account data is flowing into MCP and users are associating to that data. I'm saying this with a lot of hesitation because technically as of right now, per Salesforce, that tool will be end of life by September of this year. So you're going to potentially have some issues if you want to send that in from an implementation perspective, because personalization may not be able to handle that in the future. So instead, based on your question about account lifetime value, you could, instead of saying, let's send in all of the account based information into a segment for that person, or sorry, for that overall account, maybe we associate the individuals and their lifetime value and do a calculation in that fashion. Because again, personalization is focused on doing a one-to-one conversation with someone on any channel versus a one-to-many conversation for a full account. Don't know if I've actually answered your question, but there are a couple of ways. Feel free to come off mute if there's any additional thoughts you want to add there. Okay. JB, is there any other questions? I didn't know if I missed any.
Checking Jacob. I think those are all the questions. I don't see anything else.
Cool. Well, luckily for all of you all, I prepared my own questions
That's
that I
great.
typically see, and I'll answer them myself. Yes, you'll have a copy of the slides. Thank you, JB, for answering. All right. So, what would I expect to hear in the market as you start talking about both of these products and the connectors from your clients? So, first one, hey, can I update an attribute in MCP and Data Cloud at the same time, or update them into a source system and have the data flowing? So yes, if you update an attribute in Data Cloud that you want to populate down via the connector into MCP, you can update that DMO in Data Cloud with a specific attribute and then map it to a field in the DMO, which then can be mapped to an attribute in MCP. So similar to the vein of thought we talked about with the account segments above, or that last question, you could send in an account lifetime value user attribute that then you could use for real-time changes of the banner or the site itself. Cool. Before I keep going down my questions, there's another one that comes in. There is an error while loading data to Data Cloud from MCP. And then if we retry the segment, does it create a new data extension in MCP or does it overwrite the existing DE? So first thing to unpack is there's no data extension concepts within the personalization platform. So the data that will be sent into personalization from Data Cloud is going to be associated as a segment, which basically is a grouping of individuals based off your whatever criteria that you set for that segment, or it's going to be sent down as an attribute to associate to a user. So if myself as a user with an MCP and I send multiple attributes on first name, last name, email address, a lifetime value calculated insight, or maybe another calculated insight on churn value or the likelihood to churn, that's what will be sent through. So it wouldn't overwrite DEs. Now, if you're talking about data extensions, maybe you're talking about the Marketing Cloud engagement or Marketing Cloud platform overall. That's a different connector and a different process. So hopefully that helps. Cool. Okay, next question from what I typically hear out in the market. Yeah, no problem. So, I mean, I think I've scraped the surface because most of the people would be like, Jacob, okay, this presentation has been helpful to a point, but really, when do I use each product and what cannot be achieved by each product so that I can make the right decisioning? So as we've probably, if I hopefully have outlined well enough to you all, there's a lot of overlap between the two products, and it truly depends on your use case. Shocking, the consultant says it depends. Uh, but at a high enough level, when we think about Data Cloud versus MCP, I think I've mentioned it already. MCP is a real-time interaction management platform. It's made for real-time collection of data that is then going to be displayed, or we use that data to do a personalized campaign for someone quickly. Data Cloud is meant for volume of data. And that volume of data is much higher of a processing perspective and storage perspective than MCP will ever have. So the two systems are not the same in that function, and they should be used in different ways. But the one thing Data Cloud right now does not have is that activation layer, which means you can collect a crap ton of data. Sorry, you can collect a lot of data in Data Cloud, activate it into other channels, but it doesn't have a real-time interaction layer of being able to say, change banner to pop up, etc. on the site, which hint, hint, it might have it soon. Okay, next conversation. Next question that I typically get is, how does this work with the Marketing Cloud Collect code? Because Marketing Cloud, if you know the Marketing Cloud platform well, also had this dabbling in collect code and collect tracking way back in the day. So there's a little overlap between the Marketing Cloud engagement collect code and what it connects and collects overall, but they are not connected, meaning they don't talk to one another. So if you collect information on a product, a page view, etc., based in Marketing Cloud engagement, that's not the same as the first party SDK beacon that we do in personalization. In my personal opinion, and there's some in the industry, and there's some who would disagree with this, I think they're drastically different products. I also think the collect code does not really expand a reach for a client versus MCP or even potentially the web and analytics, the web and mobile connector from Data Cloud itself. Cool. Another question that has been sourced based off being asked many times. So we can collect information based off like time spent on page in MCP. Is that on the roadmap to share that information into Data Cloud to help you with your segment creation? So as of right now, you can't add a custom field to events where the connector is sending data, which means you wouldn't be able to really do that. That's a tough one, but you could probably find a couple of workarounds to send in that information. Okay, now what's the alternative to the connector, Jacob? So I don't want to use MCP, the Data Cloud connector, but I can't scale. But it does the web and mobile connector with Data Cloud itself doesn't scale to my needs. Well, technically, you could create a custom solution, especially if it's going to be the solution that basically asks, hey, I want to be able to send that campaign data from MCP into Data Cloud itself. So in the past, there was something that MCP had, which is a way to send data to a Redshift data warehouse. Some clients will still have that as a legacy SKU. So if you have a client who does have the data warehouse SKU with an MCP, you could probably do some really interesting things of sending that data to Data Cloud, but it's not a solution that's going to work for everyone because not everyone still has that SKU, and nor can it be bought anymore. So you'll probably have to think of a custom solution like we talked about in the other part of the presentation that says, how do we send some campaign data to Data Cloud? Hopefully you guys like my questions because I have a couple more, and then we can probably end a little early unless there's others. Another question that typically is asked is, well, Jake, MCP sounds great, but I have Google Analytics. Isn't Google Analytics going to capture a lot of this information that I already need on a website? So I think we talked about it a little bit, but I'll expand right now. So MCP and GA, they're not the same thing. Hopefully that just comes across. So they're not the same thing, but they actually do work in a good, symbiotic relationship together because GA is going to handle information that otherwise Data Cloud or MCP wouldn't be collecting overall. Because again, MCP is not a tracking tool. GA is, and GA is going to collect a lot more interesting information. Now, MCP is also not a replacement of GA. It's not a replacement for any of the static reporting in GA either. And so there is a way that you have these systems working together to collect a holistic view of what your customer, member, prospect, etc. is doing on your digital apps. Then you'll be able to understand at least better what they're doing. Were there any other ones? Well, I had two more, but they're not that great. So are there any other questions from the group overall? Anything you all want to talk about before we end a little early?
And
Okay.
you did a great job covering all the questions, Jacob. So those were the main questions that I saw being asked. So you covered it very well. Thank you for that.
Yeah.
In the chat as well, I see you have covered all the questions that are listed in here. So I think we're good.
Okay, cool. Well, I did plan, shocking. I'm a decent consultant. I planned just in case we had a little bit more time.
Thank
There's a
you.
couple of additional bonus slides for everybody, just in case. So if you wanted to see the Marketing Cloud Personalization user attributes, we talked about a user attribute coming in from Data Cloud. You can see a calculated insight. Could come through as an attribute to what someone had mentioned before in the chat. That could come through as an attribute, then be shown as the attribute here, and then be used in a segment. And then that segment could be used to display information. So just another way, and I'll go through it. I'll show you guys one more time. That's another way of you see how Data Cloud and its robust data engine itself, as well as what it's going to be connecting to throughout your customer client's ecosystem, it can really feed in and provide really, really interesting information into personalization to then do more robust campaigns. So attribute on the user profile, segment again. So cool. That was my last little bit just in case we had extra time. So JB, I'll hand the virtual mic back to you.
That's awesome. Thank you, Jacob, and thanks for the bonus slides and bonus information as well. Really appreciate that.
No problem.
And for everyone attending this session, thank you for your continued passion to learn and upskill. So we really appreciate your enthusiasm and skilling up. So I'll be sharing the recording on the slide deck soon, and the YouTube channel is @NC Learning Camp. And if you have any questions post this session, please post them on the Slack channel. So the next session is this Thursday, the hands-on session. And next Tuesday, we have another deep dive session by Funny. That's about the implementation best practices and requirements planning. So make sure that you have registered to the event, and hope to see you again. Thank you. And thank you, Jacob, once again.
Thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you. Bye.